Hey guys, welcome to Insomniacs, the podcast where we talk about all things true crime, supernatural, and mysterious. I'm Char.
And I'm Ashley, and these are the scary stories that keep us up at night.
So, where we left off on part 1, Ashley was about to spill some tea regarding Richard and his scandalous love life.
Yes, definitely. So, okay, here's the tea. So he meets Barbara, right? Isn't she like the receptionist of the trucking company he hates?
Yeah.
And he starts pursuing Barbara kind of relentlessly.
Shut up.
And
Ooh, you dirty.
yeah, so he kind of starts pursuing her, right? And she's kind of trying to, she's not really picking up what he's putting down.
And she's younger. She's like 7 years younger.
Yeah. So I think she was 19,
Yes, yeah.
right? And he was like 26.
And for context, this is in the
met.
1960s at this point.
Early
Yeah.
1960s. Yeah. They kind of start dating, but he's kind of more into her than she is to him. But eventually he gets her pregnant.
While he's married to Linda?
Oh, he's still married to Linda at this point. He gets her pregnant, and her parents are like, oh, hell to the no. So they actually pay for Richard to divorce Linda so that he could marry Barbara.
Oh, well, he didn't really care about his marriage to Linda aneway, so
Exactly. He was like, I upgraded to a newer model.
To a younger model. That's terrible. All right.
But it's probably what he was thinking.
Yeah.
He's a terrible person.
Yeah. Well, I think maybe, and this is speculation, but I think maybe he cared a little bit more for his wife, Barbara, than he did Linda. Maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, he never really cared about Linda.
Yeah.
She was just kind of a possession, a way out of his mother's house.
Yeah, there
was never really any love there.
We don't really have a whole lot of information on his two eldest kids. They just weren't in the picture anymore after the divorce. He wasn't in their lives at all. So there's not a whole lot of information about the two eldest children. So he divorces Linda, he marries Barbara, and then they had the first of 3 children. So he gets remarried to Barbara, and he's having the first of 3 children with her. And so their family is kind of growing. The expenses are growing. He only has like an 8th grade education. So he's like you had mentioned before, he doesn't have a whole lot of ways to make a lot of money to afford their lifestyle, I guess. He was still doing kind of those side gigs, but he was like, I need more money. He started working at a place called the Manhattan Film Lab. And so he first started copying and bootlegging movies like Disney movies or to get some money on the side.
Listen, I love me a good Disney movie.
Right.
So.
And so I think,
I get
and
that.
a lot of people, liked it too. And I guess business was good. I don't know. But he ended up creating a new posse, a new gang of 5 other individuals who helped him with the distribution of these tapes. But what they discovered later is that pornography tapes was booming. And so they started getting into the distribution of pornography to kind of increase the income, And so after they started getting into that business, Richard was able to move them into a medium income neighborhood. So they moved into a really nice house in some suburban neighborhood, and they were living like the good life.
Kind of like living like the middle class kind of dream, white picket fence, 2.5 kids,
so
a dog.
He was able to make some money by getting into the illegal distribution of pornography. Good for him, I guess, as one does. But he ended up, he was still working with crime families and doing hits on the side too. And what's interesting to me about it was his families claimed they had no idea about what he was doing. So for an example, if daddy had to go at 10 o'clock at night on Christmas Eve to go to a business meeting, quote unquote, they
business, quote quote unquote.
Daddy's gotta go. And like they didn't question it. They weren't really allowed to. Because he was very
Right. Well, he was abusive to
yeah,
Barbara too, wasn't he?
there was abuse in the family. There was a lot of domestic violence that was witnessed by the kids. I'm not really clear on if he abused his kids at all. I know he was very he spoiled his kids and he had a favorite, which I think was the oldest child, Merrick. But
Yeah, his daughter Merrick was, like, his favorite, but yeah, I think I read that Barbara did try to do a
from
lot
it.
to
So they had
shield the
no idea
children
at
from
least.
the
The
abuse that
kids
she
didn't
went through.
they see
Well, they definitely did. The kids, there's interviews afterwards where the kids were like, "I knew what he was fucking
yeah.
doing. He was garbage." Merrick is the only kid who was like, "I love my dad," and really stuck with her
Yeah.
dad until the
So
end.
so if daddy had to leave in the middle of the night, they just learned not to really question it. And he was very pertinent about keeping his business, his Jekyll and Hyde um lifestyle as he described it. He wanted the perfect
Mhm.
family image. Neighbors had no idea what was going on. They just thought he was this family man, this neighbor, this really great guy, but then he was out doing what he was doing. So there was the Jekyll and Hyde like
Right.
personality type, and he just kind of had to juggle both lifestyles for a long time. So he had a new posse, a new gang, and eventually he kind of got behind on some of his pornography tape dealings, and he got into some bad business with
Mm.
yeah.
Tony Agrila was the person he was working with in the porn business. He ended up owing
We know
Tony
what
some money,
happens.
and Tony went to
We
his
know what
little
happens when you owe
buddy.
the mafia
Yep,
money.
yeah. Yeah, so Tony goes to his little buddy, Roy DeMeo, who is, part of the Gambino crime family and is like, "Yo, like, this guy owes me money. He has a fucking attitude. He's not paying me back. Like, you need to have a
That
conversation
was
with
nice.
him,
Good job.
right? Like, you need to have a conversation with this dude." So, Roy does. Roy kind of,
Richard and
confronts
where's my
confronts
money?
Richard. Richard's kinda smart about it. Yeah, "Where's my money?" You know?
Have you
"Give me my
sorry,
fucking
just a
money."
quick pause. Have you seen that Will Ferrell video of his daughter Pearl and she's the landlord? Where's my
Yes.
money? That's
Yes,
what
the
I think of.
landlord, yes. "Where's my money?" I love that. I
Go
forgot
watch it
about that
after this.
video.
So Roy comes knocking
I
like,
love
"Hey
that
man, you
one.
owe me money." And then Richard has an attitude with him.
Mhm. Well, kind of, but Richard's also smart enough to know, like, this is a guy that's pretty high up in the
Mhm.
Gambino crime family, so he's kind of smart enough to know that he
Yeah.
needs to kinda play it smart, so he takes the beating.
He's lucky he got a beating only.
But, of course, he's kinda pissed about this, right? Like, some guy, like, beat him up, like, who the hell does he think he is? Like, Richard,
Probably got a flashback of his childhood, like, "Oh, fuck. No, I thought we were done with
right?
this."
Yeah. I'm done being the prey. So, what happens is Richard ends up approaching DeMeo, and he's like, "I have a business proposition for you." And DeMeo's like, "You got my money?" He's like, "No, I don't fucking got your money." Like
I don't got your
But
fucking
what I
money.
do have is like, why don't instead of Tony being the middleman, why don't just you and I work together? He's like, that way I can just make the money directly for you. And this is kind of the birth of
Fuck
like this
yeah.
this partnership from hell.
Friendship,
Yeah. So
mentorship.
this is kind of
Yeah.
where Richard kind of gets in with some of the larger crime families. Like the Gambino crime family was a big name in the mafia at this time.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. One of the 5 major crime families at that time. So yeah, so he
Mhm.
starts working for DeMeo and, introduces him to better contracts for, hire to support his family and that whole lifestyle that he has always dreamed about having.
Mhm.
So one of the main places that uh, this crime family worked out of was called the Gemini Lounge in Brooklyn, and it sounds
Sounds like
like a
such a
really
nice
nice
little
club
dance
you would go
club.
to after work for a nice cocktail. And anyway,
Heck
so
yeah.
this lounge was kind of known for being like a murder house. So if you if you were in trouble with the mafia, if you didn't pay your debts,
So not a dance
it's not a
place.
dance I mean, you could try, but I don't know if you'd come back out alive. So if you owed money from the mafia and if you were brought there, chances are you probably weren't coming back out, unless you were in, like, 15 pieces.
Oh, lovely.
You come in,
Love that. Love that journey
come
for
back out
them.
in pieces, so people were murdered and processed, their bodies were cut up, and, they were disposed of. So it was called a murder lounge, I think. So people were dismembered, and I think about the interview that, Richard gave when he talked about the processing of the bodies in the Gemini Lounge. When asked at the interview, they said, "Did you use chainsaws?" And he clarified, he said that
Oh.
he did use chainsaws, he did not use chainsaws to murder people, he just used it to dismember bodies. What I think is really interesting.
Oh, that's so much
Right, and
better.
what I think is interesting is that, dismembering a body, I could only imagine would be gruesome and horrific and nauseating, but he described it as messy, and he didn't like that. He liked things to be clean, and what he described was when he used a chainsaw, it would just bother him that he would have to pick off the flesh, like, off of his clothes, like, if
Oh
like, he bought a
god.
new tie, and he's just like, "I just got this outfit, like, what the fuck?"
Damn it, I just got this new jacket. I
Like,
really liked the
the
color.
way right? And then he just so what is unnerving is that he
This
just
blood stain is never gonna come out.
pretty that's how he kind of described it. His attitude was, it was really, really messy, and he didn't like that, and it didn't bother him that he was dismembering bodies, just that it was messy, and that the tools that he liked using, that were much more clean were just regular, like, knives or butchering knives, and so I thought that was really interesting that when he was describing that, he was like, "Yeah, it was messy. Hey, yo." So he was making
I
a
mean, blood is notoriously hard to get out of clothing, so
blood and flesh and pieces, like chunks of meat is what he
ugh,
described as like chunks of meat. He had to pick it off, like flick it off of his
god.
like it's just a 9 to 5 to him. Like it doesn't it's just another day and another Tuesday in the office, Yeah.
Damn it, Barbara just bought me this tie.
Right. Anyway, so by this time, yeah, so they moved to a nice middle class neighborhood. He described
Mhm.
that when he was hired for a hit contract, he did like to charge in the upper 5 figures, almost 6-figure range to support that lifestyle.
Okay.
That's
I
a
wonder how much that is in, like, today's
I
money.
don't know. I
Like,
didn't do the
if he
conversion
was
for you.
charging,
I'm
say,
sorry.
like, 85,000.
Back then, and so this was in like the 60s, the 70s. In the 80s. He was doing this in the 80s
Okay.
too. You're converting it right now?
I'm interested. So, like, say,
Mhm.
like, we did, like, 5 figures, right? So, like,
But yeah, he said the upper 5
85,000, right?
figures.
That's high 8 upper 5 figures. So let's just say, like,
Mhm.
85,000. That would be $666,257 in today's
Stop.
money.
That's like that's
That would
wild.
be yeah,
That is that's
that
crazy.
would be almost 3/4 of
For
$1,000,000 per
yeah,
hit.
that's kind of wild to think about. Anyway, so yeah, that's what he was charging for his hits whenever he would be contracted, because he said he described he wasn't gonna do it for chump change, because why would he?
Well, no, I mean, he needs to be able to afford buying new ties whenever they get
Mhm.
stained.
So, moving forward, Richard was, uh, committing these crimes and these hit contracts through most of his life, but for the hits, he was doing this in the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s. When Richard got
Mhm,
older, in his 50s, he started getting messy, as police described it, because his
mhm.
crime gang, the one that was distributing the tapes for the pornography tapes and making that side money, they were kind
Yeah.
of under the radar of the police. They were kinda like, "What the fuck?" this is fishy. And so they were kind of
Okay.
under investigation. So I think one of the crime members, and this is separate from the hit contracting work, this is his own gang. One of them was arrested. Um, we're going to move into the section where he started becoming more under the radar of the police and his most notable murders that linked him and got him convicted
Okay. So we're finally almost at the end of his
of his of
horrific
his
reign of
career. And
terror.
so the first murder that was linked to Kuklinski was a business partner. He sold the tapes to, this person's name was George Malaband, on January 30th, 1980. He was going to sell some of these tapes to this person. And this person, George, was carrying 27 grand on him. He was going to exchange it for tapes or whatnot. But what ended up happening was they met at a meeting spot to conduct this business, and Richard killed him. He shot him, and he shot him 5 times because I guess one didn't do it. And
Right. Well, I wanted to make sure.
yeah, and he stuffed him into a 55-gallon drum and got rid of that drum. I think it may have been found later because I think he couldn't get George completely in the drum. And so he had to like cut off his part of his leg to stuff him in there.
Yes.
And
Also,
the
in case you were wondering about the math, 27,000 would have been about $100,000 today.
Oh my god. That was wild. So no wonder he was just, like, shooting this guy and taking the money and, just quick, easy money. That's all he cared about. It was business. And so
Right?
he stuffed this guy in a barrel. The barrel was discovered, and that's when he kind of was getting under the radar because when George Malaband's family was like, "He's missing. Oh my god. Like, we can't find him." And who was he with last? He was with Kuklinski. Oh my
He was
god.
with
And so
Richard.
suspicious about like, okay, he last saw his business partner. Where the fuck did he go? And so
Right.
that's how he got under the radar and started becoming more under investigation because they're like, we know
Mhm.
this guy's doing something.
Yeah. So not
And
under the radar, but this is how he got on the police's radar.
right.
Because under the
So that,
radar is like being
my
undetected.
bad. Sorry. He was under the radar up until he started getting sloppier with his killings. And so he was suspected, like, you were the last person that this guy was with. So now you're on the radar uh, for how this guy died. Later on, when asked about it, like, why did you kill him? He said, it was just business.
Just business.
It was a business transaction. That was all it was to him. It was nothing personal.
Yeah.
In the early 1980s, one of the gang members for the distribution tape business that he was in, Gary Smith, was talking about wanting out of the crime life. He was telling this to Kuklinski. He was like, "Hey, man, I want out." And Richard felt like this was a problem because he's like, "Well,
Mhm.
now you're kind of a loose end. What if you go to the police and like out me or out the business, or you're kind of a problem now?" Richard thought that Gary would betray him. So Kuklinski decided that Smith needed to be gone, and one of the I don't want to say the one of the favorite ways, but one of the most used ways that Richard was able to kill someone that kind of was like under this is under the radar. He used cyanide. He sat
Uh-huh.
down for a business meeting with Gary, his gang member, and they had a
Of
burger as
course.
one does when they're going out for a business meeting.
Love me a good burger.
Gary was like, I'm gonna go to the bathroom, BRB." And Richard put cyanide on his burger, and then he came back and they ate. I guess Gary didn't die right away, so they ended up strangling him to death at a hotel. So
Uh-huh.
they killed poor Gary by strangulation. And they stuffed him in a mattress bed, the box spring. They put him in there, like in the
Oh.
hotel that they were staying at. So after lunch, they went to the hotel, strangled him, stuffed him in a box spring, and left him there. And the body wasn't found for a few days. And the room was continued to being
Oh god.
used by so the
No.
uh, the so the hotel was continuously being used by the patrons, and they started smelling a stinky smell and complained to management, and management
How long
I
before
think it
a
was, like
dead body
I wanna
starts
I
to
wanna say he was in
smell?
there, for 5 days before it started getting really stinky and management found it.
4 to 10 days after
Yeah,
death is
can you
when the smells
imagine?
start. Thank God for Google. Also, I'm really sorry to the FBI agent who's monitoring my phone. I promise I
Yeah,
don't actually
okay.
need to
No, I'm
know
kidding.
for, like, real real life how
Yeah.
long until a body starts to
You better
smell.
hope that Joshua doesn't go missing. Just kidding.
I better hope that when he does, I have a good alibi.
I was recording this podcast, I swear.
I swear.
Anyway, okay, so poor Gary, he was they tried to poison him with cyanide. It didn't work. I guess he had a strong immune system. I don't really know what that is.
Maybe,
Why it didn't kill. Maybe they didn't put
maybe
enough.
he was slowly building up his immunity to cyanide, just like, in The Princess Bride, he was building up his immunity to iocane powder.
Right. Obviously. Anyway, so they found poor Gary's body. Like 5 days later, management came in to investigate,
Oh
and they
god.
called the police. Obviously. So, what was really interesting about why this murder is so important to note is that investigators would not have suspected foul play if Gary had just died by the cyanide, because it's so undetectable
Yeah, cyanide is really hard to
unless
detect.
you're specifically looking for it. They would have thought that and also the body was deliberately hidden in a mattress. So like,
Right.
if those two things hadn't occurred, then they would have thought that Gary would have died from natural causes. They would have had no reason to suspect foul play.
Yeah, so I have a fun fact about cyanide poisoning, as one does. And if anyone knows me in real life, one of the things is, like, I just have these
Uh-huh.
random factoids running around in my brain. Cyanide actually has a really kind of faint, subtle, like, bitter almond smell, but only a small portion of the population, so only a small
Can
portion
smell
of
it.
the population actually has the genes that can smell
Really?
cyanide.
That is really interesting. Did you just Google search that one day and you're like,
I
hmm?
think no, I think I remember hearing I think it was probably on one of the other murder podcasts I listened to, but it's just one of the
Oh,
fun facts I have floating around in my brain. It has a faint bitter almond smell, and only a small portion of the population actually has the genetic ability to smell it.
I did not know that.
Yeah, so
That's really
really
fascinating, actually.
I really better hope that my husband never goes missing,
Yeah.
because good lord, I will be
They're gonna look at your search history.
top top
Cyanide.
of the
How
list.
to bury a cadaver. Hmm.
How long until a dead body starts to smell? And they're gonna be like, so what is your alibi, Ashley?"
I was with Char, I swear.
I
Anyway,
swear.
all right. So that was really interesting with the when Gary Smith's body was found.
But yeah, if he had just been patient and just let the cyanide do its work, then it probably wouldn't have been suspicious.
They're like, "No, we need him gone now." When I say we, this is Richard and also his other gang members that
Yeah.
were left. So they disposed of Gary's body once upon a time, and then it was found. And then they were like, "Okay, this is kind of a problem, and we need to look more into Richard, because Richard was the last person Gary was with at the time, of
Yeah.
death." They were able to deduce that anyway. So another prominent murder, and probably one of the most important ones that we're going to mention, is the disappearance of Louis Mazgay.
Okay.
This person went missing, and who was another associate, a business partner of Richard's. He
Convenient, huh?
disappeared. Yeah,
How
so he
weird.
disappeared. He disappeared in July of 1981, and he was missing for a long time, but his body turned up and wasn't found until September 25th, 1983. And so
Uh-huh.
that's kind of a long time.
Yeah, that's a bit, you know.
So what was really important about this murder that was noted was that there was a bullet hole in the back of his head.
Mhm.
And so when the examiner was doing the autopsy to figure out like the time of death and all of that, the examiner noticed that there was ice crystals on the inside of the body. And that doesn't happen. Like, what the fuck?
It doesn't happen naturally, you know.
Yeah, right. So if you're just someone who is murdered and you're left on the side of the road somewhere, you don't just get ice crystals, and I don't know if you know that, but anyway, there
Yeah,
was
exactly. I mean, it's not like they were dumped in Antarctica or something, you know?
I mean, that could have been a thing, but this was not Antarctica.
And also it's been what, 2 years you said? 3 years? It's been
Yeah, it's
yeah,
about 2 years, when he was missing to when he was found, in 1983, and it's September, so it ain't that fucking cold yet.
right.
But anyway, his body was found, and it was partially thawed, so there's ice crystals, and they were like, "That's fucking weird."
Yeah.
I don't know if they said that, but that's weird. And so what the investigators, kinda dubbed Richard when they tied him to this murder
Mhm.
was they dubbed him the Iceman because he
Oh.
had this habit of murdering someone, they're go that and then they end up going missing for a long period of time. He was keeping their bodies in a freezer, and he was
Just
keeping
keeping
them
them on
on ice
ice?
in a freezer somewhere, and then he would, in order to fool the investigators in the time of death, he would take them back out and thaw them, and he would leave them somewhere else, like miles and miles away. So he wouldn't.
So again, probably another thing that he learned from his love
Right.
of true crime magazines is that police, use like body temp to try and determine time of death. And so if
Mhm.
that gets confused, it makes it a lot harder to identify who was the last
Yeah,
person to
because
be
if they
seen
were
with the
missing over
person.
2 years ago and then, then how can they kind of figure out who he was last associated with? I don't know. So they were just like, "What the hell?"
Right.
And then Richard, later admitted, to this murder in his plea bargain. But before we get into all that, while he was under investigation for 3 years. They were trying to get enough information on him to really get him. They didn't have anything that really tied him to these murders, except for he was the last
Mhm.
person seen with them. So they had a task force that they put together, and it contained federal, state, and local law enforcement. Like a bunch of people got everyone
Just
to try and get this
everybody.
guy. They're just like, we're fucking sick of him doing all this shit. We know he's doing this, and we don't have enough to get him. So they
Right.
ended up having a undercover agent posing as a hitman, and they were recording him having conversations with this guy, and he was talking about
Mhm.
some of his murders and some of his tactics. And we talked about the cyanide a lot. He did talk about, I think he was talking about the freezing of the bodies, and he talked a lot about all this on recording. And so they had enough finally where they were able to arrest him. So on December 17th, 1986, this special task force were able to set up like a barricade on the street and finally arrest him. And I know that we had talked about how Kuklinski was like a young, scrawny little boy when
When he was a boy, but when he grew into a man,
he was a big boy, and they had a hard time getting him in handcuffs because he was, like, over 6'5" or 4 or something like
he was like
that, 300
6'5",
pounds.
6'4", 6'5", 6'6", and like almost 300 pounds. He was he went from a very scrawny,
Yeah.
awkward little boy into a big
So,
man.
yeah, they were finally able to get him, under arrest, and what was interesting is there's video footage of him saying, "You this is all in your guys' imagination, you're reading too many stories." He's, "Whatever, it wasn't me." Like, he was like, "Whatever, man." Like, he's super
Super
deflecting, super
deflecting.
cocky, and like, "You guys got nothing on me." Kinda that was his attitude. Kuklinski, went to I don't know if he went to trial, but there was a plea bargain, and his other former band or gang members testified against him. And he was
Mhm.
found guilty in March of 1988 for the murders of Smith and Deppner. Those are two of his previous gang members. Deppner, they didn't really have a whole lot of evidence. I think Kuklinski just admitted his murder, but they didn't have a lot of evidence when they found his body. And then later on, Richard also admitted to the murders of Mazgay and Malaband, which were the Mazgay was the guy who was found who was partially frozen, and then Malaband was the guy he stuffed in the 55-gallon drum. And there's other murders, I believe, that he also pled guilty or admitted to doing, but there wasn't enough information. They never found the bodies. They didn't charge him for those, but he did admit several other murders.
I mean, according to Richard, he's easily killed over 200 people, according to Richard.
Yeah, so, I mean, you kind of lose count after, the first dozen, I guess. I don't know.
They
But
start to blend together.
He was convicted and given 4 life sentences and incarcerated at Trenton State Prison, which, fun fact, I don't know if we talked about this, but
his younger brother.
Richard had his younger brother was also convicted and also attending
like it's at college. He was also attending Trenton State Prison. Go Tigers!
He was incarcerated at Trenton State as well but he was convicted of the murder of a 12-year-old girl, and he raped and murdered her. So anyway, but they weren't very close. They weren't close at all. They didn't really talk while at their stay at the prison.
While they were attending.
Like I had said, there's other subsequent murders that Kuklinski said that he was involved with. There was a cop that was a dirty cop. He alleged that he was involved with his disappearance. He was also rumored to be involved with Jimmy Hoffa's disappearance too, which I thought was really interesting. If you don't know who that is, we're going to do an episode later. He's an infamous politician that went missing who was involved with the mafia. Although it wasn't proven, there's some sources that say, yeah, I know he wasn't involved, but it's all speculation.
He wasn't. It depends on who you ask. Yeah.
He said that he was, and he kind of described like how he got rid of his body, which involved a 55-gallon drum, which I think that was his favorite method of disposing people, just stuffing them in a drum and getting rid of it. But what I thought was the most horrific and what has stuck with me, and you too, you know exactly what I'm going to say.
This has been the reason that
he pops up sometimes in my head.
Yeah, this has been the reason why, like, I can't stop thinking about him because this is horrifying.
Picture this, if you would.
Sicily, 1900.
A deep, dark cave, and you're a victim who's bound at the wrists and bound at the feet, and you're placed in this cave in the dark, and he's recording you being eaten alive by rats.
Yep.
That's what Richard said that he did. So if there was a hit contract that specifically required torture,
or for the person to suffer,
torture, he would take people, these individuals, and he would place them in a cave and where they would be bound and then eaten by cave rats. And he described that he videotaped them
to watch it back
and then
later.
He watched it back later, and when asked why he did that, he explained that he wanted to see if he would feel something, like some kind of like an emotional response from it, which he never did. So we don't know if that's true. Investigators who kind of looked into that after he said that he did all that, they said that they never could find any kind of remains, and that those caves that he said that he took those victims to, they're popular tourist areas, so they would be highly populated by people, and nothing was ever reported. Additionally, cave rats aren't really like man-eating cave rats. They were very reclusive and shy and probably would hide and run away. And so there's not really any proof of that or videotape evidence that he did those things. But it's also interesting that he went into such detail about it.
Yes, it's definitely, like I said, this is what I think, this is the reason why his story has stuck with me for so long, is because he goes into detail about the rat. And I know they're like cave rats, right? So they're probably like, normal size rats or maybe slightly larger rats. But like in my head, right? All I picture are like the ROUSs, the rats of unusual sizes from The Princess Bride. Like these giant, like horrific, monstrous rats who are just eating people.
That's what I think of.
And it's just, this is...
Leslie, what about the ROUSs?
Rodents of unusual size?
I don't think they exist.
And so, yes, there's no evidence. It's Richard says he did,
We don't
but,
know.
maybe not. But we couldn't end the episode without at least telling all of you
About that.
guys about it, because this was probably the thing that stuck out most in both of our heads when
When I
learning
think
about
about him, I
him.
think about that, and it's just disturbing to think about. So later on, while Richard has been incarcerated for a while now, he does do some interviews. He does an interview with a Dr. Park Dietz, who is a forensic psychologist.
Mhm.
He did this interview in 2002, and they had like a lengthy interview. I think they said it was 13 to 14 hours long. Richard wanted to know why
Yeah.
he was kind of the way he was, or what kind of disorder it was, why he was like that, because it's not normal,
Mhm.
obviously. The doctor
Right.
had described that Richard suffered from two different kinds of personality disorders. And
Mhm.
actually, hold please. I'm going to Google the exact definition. Okay. So the first personality disorder is called antisocial personality disorder. It was said that it affects about 2 to
Yeah.
3% of males, and it's described as someone who doesn't have any kind of conscience or remorse or guilt. The definition would
Okay.
be just someone who tends to lie, break laws, act impulsively, and they have no regard for their safety or the safety of others. So, that sounds about right.
Yeah, that aligns, that matches.
So, another early sign of people who might have this disorder, not everybody may do this, but in Richard's case, there may be cruelty towards animals and people,
Check.
and we definitely saw that in Richard's
Mhm.
case. It also is a disorder that is hereditary. Has a hereditary fearlessness. It was described that other people who might have something like that might be daredevil people who like skydive or are firefighters. They jump into a room with the fire, and they're just good people who don't murder, probably.
Right. Just because you have a personality disorder does not mean that you are also a horrific murderer. Like, that's why this nature versus nurture argument is so it's
Yeah,
wishy-washy, because, like, you could be there are plenty of people who are raised in horrific environments who do not grow up to be
right.
murderers. And there are people who grew up in perfectly fine environments
And
who
they
grew up
just
to be
be murdering
monsters, and
people.
so it has to be a combination. They just be out there
This
murdering.
The second personality disorder is called paranoid personality disorder, and it is found to affect about
Mhm.
1 to 2% of people in the population. They are found to trust no one or let anyone get close to them. They're unforgiving and will seek revenge
Mhm.
on those who wrong them. So you'll see that a lot with when looking
Okay.
back at the story. Most of Richard's business partners, he didn't have any friends, and he killed most of his business partners. He didn't have really anyone left because he murdered them all.
Yeah.
So it's kind of sad.
Right.
Um, so it so we talked about how there's only a few percentage of people who have each of those, but even fewer who have both at the same time, and also who grew up in such a horrific background of abuse. And that's kind of like what the doctor describes of how he turned out how he did, was all of these things
Is
coupled
really just
together.
kind of the perfect storm.
Right. And so um there are very few people who have these two disorders together and were also come from his background. He's incarcerated. So in 1993, his wife Barbara and him divorced for financial reasons, but she had stated, or it was known, that she would still visit him once a year. So she was still visiting him, even though they got divorced. So I don't know if there's complications like financially. I'm not sure what the reasons were. But later on, Richard was
Right.
diagnosed with Kawasaki disease in 2005. And that is an inflammation of blood vessels. And so, what I thought was really interesting about this next part was Richard had asked the doctors, like, should I have a cardiac arrest? Could you resuscitate me? And what ended up happening was Richard's wife had signed a do not resuscitate order. So
So she was like, "No, if he dies, get him the fuck away from
it
me."
was said that she refused to rescind it. So what happened? So he
Wow,
was diagnosed with
okay.
this in 2005, and there's a do not resuscitate order in place. His wife, I don't know why his wife was in charge of that, especially since they got divorced. I don't really fucking stand that.
I don't know, but Barbara is in her boss babe era, and she's like, I'm in charge, and if
Whatever
he
her
dies,
reas
he dies.
whatever her
He's done."
whatever her reasons were for not signing it or rescinding it, we don't know, but he did end up dying in
Mhm.
2006 at the age of 70 due to cardiac arrest. Who fucking knew? What's interesting was he was supposed to testify against a, Gambino crime family member, one of those the crime family that he worked for. There was a
Oh.
crime member, underboss who was under investigation, and Richard was supposed to testify against that guy, but he died.
How interesting.
So so
Suspicious.
the charges were dropped after he died. Richard died. So, yeah, so that guy
Right.
never got in trouble for that, I guess. I think he was in prison for some other charges anyway, but
Probably. I mean, when you're part of the Gambino crime family, when you're part of the mafia, like, chances are you're gonna be in prison for some reason at
yeah.
some point,
So,
sometime.
another interesting note before we end is that when Richard was asked questions about why he killed, or if he felt anything, or if he felt any kind of sexual gratification, he answered no. They asked if he had any kind of an adrenaline rush, and he was like, "No, I didn't feel anything." He had no feelings about it at all.
Just nothing.
When they spoke more about his family, he looked like he was getting kinda teared up when he felt like his family might be affected, so maybe that bothered him.
Mhm.
When he thought his family could get hurt or involved, he got teary-eyed about that, but when it came to, like, killing anyone, he wasn't bothered by it. It was just business, as he said.
It was just business.
Yeah, so, again, he admitted to a couple different numbers of he was like, "I think I killed over 100. I think I killed over 200 plus people." So we don't really
I
know.
killed them with rats. We don't really
He
know.
killed them with knives, he killed them with guns, he killed them with gasoline. He killed
Gasoline, because that was, more
he
inconspicuous than just shooting the guy in the
he
face,
he
obviously.
killed them with wooden dowels. Like
Which, as we know now, is basically like, a broomstick.
sure.
Something like that.
Anyway, that is the horrific tale of Richard Kuklinski, and yeah, he lives in my mind rent free, and he will. I don't know. I, it's it's kind of scary some of the things that he did, and just that he had no feeling about it
And
either way.
that is Richard, everyone. So, oh my gosh,
Round of
Char, we did
applause.
it.
Yeah, I know. I don't know how we got through that. Clap, clap, clap.
We got through it. Oh my goodness. Thank you for listening, guys. If you are enjoying this podcast, please subscribe and leave a review. That helps others to find us as well. If you want more information on Richard Kuklinski, all of our sources are going to be posted in the episode description notes. And then to stay up to date on future episodes and what's kind of going on in our lives, you can find us on pretty much all the socials. So you can find us on Instagram at Insomniacs.Pod. We're on Twitter at Insomniacs_pod. And you can find us on Facebook at Insomniacs. So in the meantime, if you hear anything that goes bump in the night, Char, what should we do?
I'm gonna fucking hide. Not opening my door.
Not gonna be, yeah. Please do not be that person in the horror movie that just kind of like, oh, there's a weird noise in the basement. Let me go check it out by myself.
Yeah, not doing that. Mm-mm.
No. But if you hear anything that goes bump in the night, I mean, at least it's not going to be Richard Kuklinski because he did.
He's dead.
But you should probably just like pretend you don't hear it. Just ignore it.
Yeah, you'll be fine. Nothing
It's
nothing happening.
fine. Exactly. But in the meantime, sweet dreams.
Sweet dreams.
I have a train.
Choo choo.
Chugga 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 chugga
Choo choo.
We're just gonna let that go by. Okay. It's a shorter Amtrak train, so it's done.